Welcome back to my podcast, Bruises, where every scar tells a story. I'm Jessica L. Mish. I am the author of Camouflage Bruises. Today, I would like to unpack a very sensitive topic that I'm going to say probably most of us can relate to, either personally or by proxy. What do I mean? Well, we're talking about trauma. And per my style, I like to start with a question. Okay. Are we products of our trauma? And does our trauma form our identity? Okay. In the previous podcast, Devin very insightfully asked her own question, are we products of nature or nurture? And we can incorporate that with the theme of our podcast here today, trauma. How does that affect our identity? And one of the reasons why I'm touching on this topic, and I'm going to gingerly walk us through it. It's a sensitive topic for me. I'm near certain it's a sensitive topic for many of the viewing audience as well, some folks out there. But I encourage you to stick with the podcast. Camouflage Bruises, the title itself pretty much gives itself away. It's a true story. It's not an autobiography, but it is a memoir. It's based on my story, my life as a young woman traversing this very challenging environment in active duty U.S. Marine Corps in the 1990s. Camouflage bruises. Why would we want to camouflage bruises? I mean, the title itself gives you a visual, right? Bruises, what does that mean? How did that happen? There was an injury somehow that we have to hide. We have to conceal it. Camouflaging it. Okay? It's a metaphor. But for some folks, it's actually real life. So I want to walk you through how the story touches on trauma for me personally and for the characters in the book. Again, I don't want to give the entire story away. My hope is that we can go through that journey together. And also, it's coming out as an audiobook, right? We're working on that together. My sound engineer, Ethan.
Hey.
Shout out to you. Master class. And then we've got Devin, of course.
Yep.
My entertainment talent manager here in Los Angeles. But as you can see, even though this is a very serious topic, talking about it doesn't have to be traumatic. Okay? We can talk about this, and the hope is that we can come out of it a little more whole than we were before. Hopefully with some tools. It's an ongoing journey to heal from trauma. Certainly, it doesn't happen in one conversation. Doesn't happen in one podcast. It doesn't happen in one therapy session. Yeah. My hope is that I can offer something through my own personal experience that could give you some insight into possibly traumas that you've been carrying yourself. I'm going to start with a quote from Camouflage Bruises. Now, yes, I am the protagonist in the story, but there is this, what I refer to as a secondary protagonist, a very key character in the book, and that is a woman that I love. We met in high school, and my journey with her through Camouflage Bruises, even though our paths diverged after high school, it started to be converged. I don't want to give the story away, but we ended up walking through our own paths of trauma. And one of the quotes that really resonates with me. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of our viewing audience, our listening audience out there. The character, her name is Jade in the book. It's not her real name to protect her identity. Jade is a fictitious name, although she's not a fictitious person. There's a scene in the book, Camouflage Bruises, where she and I are squirreled away in her mom's house in the basement. She's hiding me for reasons you'll discover when you embark on the journey of either reading the book or listening to the audiobook if you're not a big reader. But her mom starts to come down the basement stairs, calling for her, looking for her. Jade, are you down there? And she has me tucked away. She's like, hide here, just don't let her, shh, quiet. Don't let my mom know you're here. And then so I hear Jade go up the stairs and she starts talking to her mom. They go all the way upstairs and close the door. And I'm just like, okay, I'm waiting down here. I don't know what I'm doing. Is she coming back? She comes back. I hear her come down the stairs to the basement, and she stops halfway and sits on the stairs and starts crying. This is a scene in the book. She's weeping. And I remind her that I'm there in the basement. I'm like, hey, what's going on? She's like, I forgot you were here. I'm like, you forgot I was here. What's going on? She says her mom, and then her mom comes back out, yelling at her. I run back under, behind the couch in the basement. Her mom comes, opens the door up the top of the stairs again. Starts accusing Jade of doing drugs. What's wrong with you? You're hanging out with that Jessica Mish girl again, aren't you? I'm like, whoa, what's going on? I didn't know her mom didn't even like me. She's like, she's trouble, Jade. This is actual scene. These are actual words in the book, Camouflage Bruises. She's trouble, Jade. And this is the quote that I want to bring forward for this podcast. She yells back at her mom, leave me alone. You don't understand anything. Okay. I didn't know why at the time she said that to her mother. What's anything? It's a big statement. You don't understand anything. I think a lot of teenagers feel that way, but Jade was crying. So I knew that there was something in her history, in her young narrative, her childhood, somewhere, that there had to be some trauma. Something happened. And I didn't know at the time. But later I learned. Not even during the story, really. It was really after even the book came out, published, and I learned later much that she suffered some family traumas. And she felt like she couldn't trust anyone with that information. Emotionally, she didn't feel safe, like many people probably when they suffer a trauma, especially if it's from a family member, right? And when I was in the Marine Corps, that was my family. And so I felt like as a young woman in the Marines, once I went into active duty Marine Corps and I had suffered my own traumas, then I could understand what it was potentially, when your family starts to violate you, that you just wish it never happened, right? And whether you're yelling it out to someone else or to yourself, leave me alone, you don't understand anything. You just want to just shut the door to that. Just, I'm not going to talk about it. You wouldn't understand anyway. Just leave me alone. I think many times when we endure trauma, and even more harmful, multiple traumas, we find it hard for other human beings to relate to us. We think that, quite possibly, like, we are alone in this dysfunctional existence, right? Whatever the trauma was, it altered something inside of us. We felt violated. So when that happens, we start to get into this mindset of violation, and something inside of us gets altered. We may start to mask, isolate, morph into something other than our authentic selves. And many times we may evade the mirror of victimhood. I know I did when I was in the Marine Corps. There's a scene in Camouflage Bruises where I'm stationed at Pearl Harbor, Marine Barracks Pearl Harbor. My first duty station. Again, I'm fresh out of the box as a young woman Marine, active duty. And one of my sergeants informs me that there's a WM, that's what they used to call us back then, WM, short for Woman Marine, apparently, that was being flown in to Marine Barracks Pearl Harbor. And it's big news because it's so rare to have women Marines come to Pearl Harbor Marine Barracks. So I was really excited to meet her. So when they sent a van to the airport, brought her back to base, they told me her name. And I was like, wait a minute. I know this person. So I became more excited. I went to boot camp with her. She was in my platoon at Parris Island. I was like, oh, great. That's wonderful. We have that shared experience as, female recruits at Parris Island in the same platoon. And when they gave me, her location, like which room she was, actually, I found out she was only going to be there temporarily. They said for medical reasons. I'm like, well, where did she come from? And, it's a whole scene in Camouflage Bruises. They said they flew her over from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So anyway, I went to her room. And after, a brief excitement of seeing each other, she was so relieved to see me. But when I asked her why she was there, the story that she told me, and it's in the book, the story that she told me even traumatized me by proxy, even though it was her story. It happened to her. But the fact that it happened to someone that I went to boot camp with, we were having we had that shared experience. We were in the same organization. We were in the same uniform. And she told me this story of what happened to her at Camp Lejeune. Again, we start to distance ourselves from that trauma, someone else's trauma even, because that person looks so similar to you, their experience, and you're in the same organization. As soon as she told me that story, immediately my mind went to, what did she do wrong? Because everything's going great for me. What did she do wrong? In my young, inexperienced mind, I was by default, I was victim blaming. She must have done something wrong. How's that possible? But the sincerity in her voice and the tears made her story very real, to the point that it scared me. I had, in my wildest imagination, I would never have believed that could happen in my Marine Corps. I won't say what happened to her because I want you to discover it yourself. And it's a very delicate story that she told me. opened something in my mind when I heard her tell me that story, the experience that she endured at Camp Lejeune. At first, it like cut my psyche like a knife, and then I immediately like removed it and immediately went into a state of mind of, well, that's her. That's not me. I built the wall. Like that was her. She must have done something wrong. But that's not me. I'm a career Marine. I'm blazing trails. I'm a professional. That could never happen to me. That was an isolated incident. And it's clearly because she was flawed.
How does that affect your interactions with her from there forward? Do you treat her differently after knowing that information?
She wasn't there to be stationed there. The next day, they shipped her out to be medically treated. I never had another interaction with her. That was the last interaction with her in my entire life. So, again, I don't want to give away her journey, but it's laid out in the book, Camouflage Bruises. But it certainly was one of those moments in my young female life, that changed my perspective for a brief moment, and then I closed the doors real quick. Because remember, I'm with the peanut gallery. I'm with the male Marines. I'm with these guys. This is the winning team over here. To be a good Marine, to be an outstanding Marine, which is what I wanted to be, what I considered myself to be, you're not flawed. And you're certainly not a victim. Right? In the Marine Corps, we say, Marines aren't allowed to die without permission. Is there any room in that statement to be a victim? No, we are not victims. We cannot be harmed, in fact. And we don't die without permission. So, although I heard the sincerity in her voice, and I believed she was feeling pain, emotional, psychological pain, I distanced myself from that. In my mind, she's not a real Marine. Because how's that possible? Marines, they don't allow themselves to be violated. So that's part of my journey, my growth journey throughout Camouflage Bruises. It was one of those very telling turning points where I'm in denial there. I'm clearly in denial. And turning point meaning not in a good way. Like I'm going backwards. It's part of the journey. I graduated boot camp. I survived. Graduated like a college? No. I survived boot camp. 1991, October. Now, 1991, I'm going to crank it back to put things into historical perspective. 1991, September, the Tailhook scandal happened. Does anybody remember the Tailhook scandal of 1991? Anyone? That's okay. And I'm kind of glad that you don't remember it, because thank God it's that far back that the younger generations, that we have, it's kind of a good thing, because we honestly have progressed in the legislation, but we shouldn't forget. So I want to touch on it for a minute. The Tailhook scandal of 1991. I was in boot camp. I had no access to the media. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have email. We didn't have cell phones. So I had no idea this was going on. This scandal was like a national scandal. I had no idea. I was training in boot camp. But 1991 September was a turning point for the topic of sexual harassment, sexual assault on, I'll say, women in the military, although men also were victims of sexual harassment, sexual assault. Certainly sexual assault. But they just really didn't talk about it ever, especially in the Marine Corps. But yeah, Tailhook. The Tailhook Association is an association, and it's still active today. It's an association that advocates in the interest of Marine and Navy aviators' interests. And they have an annual symposium. And that year they went to Las Vegas for their, convention. And they got a hotel. Well, that year, whether they were, intoxicated or completely sober, we don't know exactly. But those men, those military men, Navy Marines, they formed a gauntlet in the hotel hallway. And any female service member that tried to walk through the hotel hallway, they were assaulted sexually. They were smacked in the ass, groped, and the tits were pinched, and their shirts were ripped off, and can you imagine? They couldn't even leave their room, the hotel room. They had to go through a gauntlet of men assaulting them. And so I know I talked about that quote from Audre Lorde in the first podcast, "Your silence will not protect you." There was one lieutenant, Paula Coughlin, 29 years old, naval aviator, that blew the whistle on that. She had the courage to step forward and report what was happening. And it went, as you say now, viral in the news networks. That opened up the floodgates for investigations in the military and an evaluation. It put the conversation of sexual assault, sexual harassment at the center of the table for, the Department of Defense. We have a major problem. Houston, we have a problem because all of these women, it's almost like that, the Me Too movement with Harvey Weinstein. All of these military women suddenly were coming forward because that one woman, Lieutenant Paula Coughlin, 29 years old, decided, no way. I am not going to be silent. I am going to speak this. I'm going to speak my truth. And because she did that, other women came forward. And it was like a deluge. So the Department of Defense was forced. That's what happens. That's the beauty of not being silent. If you can come forward, if we can come forward as a collective voice, that's where the power is there. So the Department of Defense and Congress and the executives that be in they were forced, of course, because Mothers of America, they vote. Okay. So this issue was forced to the center of the table. Investigations. Mm-hmm. Now, I couldn't appreciate what Lieutenant Paula Coughlin did at that time, which was speak her truth. I couldn't appreciate at that time. Well, you see, I graduated. I made it through boot camp. I got the dress blues, the Eagle Globe and Anchor, and then I was stationed in Pearl Harbor. And when I got to Pearl Harbor, there were discussions about, amongst the male Marines and the brass, about these problem women. See, they can't be in the military. They can't hack it. Look at these women just because a bunch of men were whistling, so they're pretty, so it should be a compliment. We know this is sexual harassment, right? This is sexual assault. But back then, it was just, boys will be boys. What's the big deal? If you can't hack it in here, what did you think was going to happen? You're around a bunch of men. What did you think was going to happen? See, you shouldn't even be here. Women shouldn't even be in combat, by the way. So it was like this whole pushback of, that's why women shouldn't be in the military in the first place, because they can't hack it. But the brass was getting the push from Mothers of America because they vote. My daughter doesn't have to hack being pinched in the tits and smacked in the ass at a military convention. Women vote. Remember that one? We got the right to vote. Does anybody remember that one? We won't talk about it today, but yeah. So at the congressional level, politicians were forced to get together with the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense. Like, wait, I'm not losing my district. We need to talk about a solution for this. We need to have investigations. We need policy in place. You got a question, Deb?
Yeah. It sounds like through a lot of this, you were starting to become a male Marine. And
In every sense.
it seems like you didn't even believe at this point now that females could be in the military yourself, that you weren't even considering yourself a female Marine anymore. You were becoming part of the peanut gallery, right? How did this, because we're talking about trauma, how did this affect coming out of the military, your view on women in just society after being through all that?
What do you mean coming out of the military? Like the coming out thing can be a dual meaning. So what do you mean?
Like leaving the military, coming back into civilian life, did you carry that view of women being less superior to men kind of with you? And how did you work through that?
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah. And those answers are built into the story of Camouflage Bruises. I definitely answer all those questions. It is a growth journey. It's a growth journey. And I learn from my naive mindset, from my origin journey and from boot camp and moving forward through the Marines and the whole Tailhook, being exposed to the Tailhook scandal and then my friend that I went to boot camp with, I'm like, oh, she's one of those Tailhook women. She's making us look bad. So you see why I distanced myself. It's not that I didn't want to be a good friend to her, right? So I was like pulled in two different directions. Like my allegiance should have been with her. Like we're two women, we went to boot camp together. But you see how society can, like when you get into that group mentality, that herd mentality, how that can be very destructive if you don't have a strong inner voice. You don't know, you're still developing the understanding of your authentic self, how you could be molded, some people call it brainwashed, influenced, whatever, how we describe it. You're being pulled away from your center, your own personal authentic center. You're being pulled away, and you are gifting yourself over to this other group of people and what they believe. Heck, they may not all believe it, but they bought into the peanut gallery. So they're all in unison now, and you're like, oh, then so am I, because I want to be a part of this group. I don't want to be extricated or ostracized from this group. This is my family. These are my friends.
Yeah, was there a moment in your kind of healing journey where you saw what you were doing mentally and you were like, whoa.
Like in hindsight.
Yeah, I was, ostracizing all these women for not doing anything wrong. And like having that moment.
There definitely is a growth journey in Camouflage Bruises. I go through this growth journey, but I wasn't really even at the very last chapter, the very last page. I wasn't yet where you're talking about. I wasn't there yet. It wasn't until, I went to Yale and I started reading literature, started, doing critical analysis and, seminars and discourse, course material about, the history of women and I don't think I've mentioned this, but I'm going to go ahead and plug it in now. The fact that I didn't see anything in my Yale literature about like any kind of studies or narratives, personal narratives, even close to what I had lived, what I was in the Marine Corps. And that's when I decided that I was going to start penning Camouflage Bruises. Even it didn't even have a title at the time. I just thought, I need to document this because it doesn't look like this kind of experience is recorded. And if it's not at Yale, then maybe it doesn't even exist. So that was like the birth of Camouflage Bruises. I was afraid that my experience would have gotten lost in oblivion if I didn't start documenting it. So that's when I made that, a framework of my senior thesis at Yale. But even then at Yale, post Marine Corps, active duty Marines, my mind was still that was the whole thing, right? In college in general, right? We're there for self-discovery. We're there to contemplate. Sure, you can get drunk and have fun and whatever you do, and you get crazy away from the parents and the college experience. But you also have time to contemplate, and there's room for self-discovery there. Certainly. It should be a part of the college experience. And that was part of my experience. But I still wasn't fully there. I will call it, my Yale University education was about information gathering. So I did a lot of information gathering because we're researchers. And it wasn't really until I went into the adult world as an entrepreneur. Because if you think about it, I went from 17 years old straight into the Marine Corps, and then like immediately into university setting, Yale University, which is also a very intense setting, but academically, almost like boot camp, except for the academics, the intellectuals. And then I became, an adult in, free enterprise, in the civilian world. So once that happened, then I started to put the pieces together. I'm like, okay, so this was my Marine Corps experience. And then this information gathering at Yale. And then and then the whole documenting and the birth of Camouflage Bruises, as a piece of the thesis, and then into a full manuscript. And I was learning about myself even I was writing it. It was almost like a cathartic experience, right? Some people will call it like emotional journaling, whatever, but I turned it into a manuscript. And then just maneuvering the milieu of, the social world, being a part of the human race, and putting it all together. It was about in my mid-30s that I started to get really introspective about my past and who I was and how I got there. And also as a woman and as a lesbian in, the greater community, the greater hetero community. Like, how do I fit? Who am I? How did I get here? All of that started happening in my probably mid-30s. Certainly I looked back at my Marine Corps experience with a sense that I was very naive. And I wished that, it's like the cliche, if I had known then what I know now, I could have saved myself a whole lot of time in the growth trajectory. But you have to go through it many times. Even if somebody's like didactic about it and they just tell you, maybe that helps, maybe. But from my experience, people learn through their own experience. They have to go through it and feel the disappointment and feel the regret and learning through pain. And then they think back, oh, I remember when my coach or my mom or that author or that podcaster told me that, and I just didn't know where to plug it in. I didn't fully understand. I heard it, I read it, but I wasn't fully comprehending the depth of that message. That's how I look back at my experience in the Marines. When my friend from boot camp and she told me what happened to her and the whole national scandal in 1991 with the Tailhook, sexual assault, sexual harassment scandal. I was hearing it, but I wasn't fully comprehending what that meant for me as a woman in my world. All I know is my default was, I'm with these guys. This is my family. This is what I signed up for. This is who I am. And I'm not breaking ranks from this. What they believe, I believe. And I remember, like, in hindsight, right? I was going through I opened up, how you have like old Foot Locker, or, you keep your, old photos or, things from the past stowed away somewhere in storage. I cracked that open after, I graduated from Yale and started to fish through things. And I found a letter that I wrote to my mother while I was stationed in Pearl Harbor as a young woman Marine. Handwritten in cursive, in blue ink, Mom, you're not going to believe this. Bill Clinton is going to let gays in the military. It's going to bring down the morale of the military, Mom. We have to stop him. Why am I writing this, right? Why? Because I got sucked in, vacuumed in to that group, that herd mentality, that mob mentality. I had erased myself. I was working against my authentic self because, and I didn't even really know it. I wasn't even like conscious of it. I denied myself. Or as I tell people about camouflage bruises, the military, the Marine Corps trained me to kill the enemy, and the enemy turned out to be me. And I killed that enemy. There was no Jessica L. Mish that was a lesbian. No, that person was dead. I killed that person. That person didn't even exist. There was no woman that, in the military that was being, victimized. No, that didn't happen. Erase that. Cancel that. That didn't happen. I'm with these guys. I'm with the winning team. I'm not a victim. We're not allowed to be victims as Marines. Remember, we don't die without permission. So if my experience is any indication to anyone out there of the hazards of gifting your identity over to groups, whether it's your church or, your corporate peer group, your colleagues at work or, whatever, your hiking group, whatever, any group, it's okay to, obviously, we're social beings. We want to connect. We have to connect. If we don't connect, look, in prison, they put you in, isolation as punishment, right? Because we have to connect for our own livelihood, to feel, inspired, to feel like whole beings. So it's okay to connect, but don't silence your authentic inner voice. And if you're a young person still like trying to figure out what that is, it's just like a little baby that you have to protect. And, So bringing it forward, there was Tailhook in 1991 and the Me Too movement, right? This was another turning point for folks that were victims of sexual harassment, of trauma, okay? And that brings to the table the whole Audre Lorde quote, silence will not protect you. Your silence will not protect you. So when Alyssa Milano, right, the actress, she's the one that really made the hashtag go viral because she blew the whistle, much like the lieutenant at Tailhook. Alyssa Milano blew the whistle and came forth with her truth that Harvey Weinstein had sexually abused her. And then all of a sudden, we know what happened in the story. Other victims came forward. And look what we did. Look what happened. See, when our collective voices come forward and we speak our truth, that's where the power is. Now, when we don't, and we hold our traumas inside, and even worse, compound traumas, we get further and further away from our authentic selves, from our identity. And it starts to morph and change us into ways that make us behave in maladaptive ways. And we can carry that over into like romantic relationships and, all sorts of unhealthy ways that affect our personal relationships. So what I want people to take away from this podcast is, if you have suffered trauma or multiple traumas, speak your truth. Find a way to speak your truth. Don't wait years to unpack that, because the more layers you put over that trauma, the further away you get, the more silence, even worse, compound traumas. And then you suppress it with silence and you don't address it. And you can address it in whichever way. Find a shaman, get a legit therapist, do some crystal healing, to do energy. in whatever ways, do a sound bath, whatever ways work for you. Address the traumas. They're painful, but if you don't address it and move and reconcile and somehow move forward in healthier ways, you get further and further away from your authentic self, and you become more susceptible to signing on with group mentality, herd mentality, because it's easier. It's like, well, I don't like this trauma that I'm carrying. I don't like that person. And so I'm going to just bury that. It's easier for me to just adopt this group identity over here, and their values and their beliefs and their perceptions. So therein lies the danger of not addressing our traumas. And I hope that through the book, you will see how I maneuvered my own personal traumas, and that as a having a multi-generational discussion here, and hopefully we can get some guests to come on to talk about it, some brave souls, maybe with their own personal experience, that we can show it is absolutely possible to move through your trauma or traumas and come out whole, and find ways to address those and cope in healthy ways, in ways that respect your authentic self. So I will leave you with that. And again, I'm Jessica Elmish. I'm the author of Camouflage Bruises. This is my podcast, Bruises Pod, where every scar tells a story. We'll see you next time.